They fired me on a Monday morning. No warning, no meeting. Just Ethan Reynolds standing in my doorway with a smug grin and a box for my things. He had no idea that by Friday at midnight the federal compliance filing I'd handled for 15 years would come due, and without me, they couldn't submit it. Miss it, and the government would shut down every sale, shipment, and payment overnight. I didn't have to lift a finger, just let the clock run out. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from? Hit that like and subscribe. If you want to hear how silence can dismantle an empire, trust me, you'll want to hear how this unfolds. They fired me on a Monday morning just 4 days before the most important midnight of the quarter. Ethan Reynolds, the new Operations Reform VP, strutted into my office with that forced confidence people wear when they think they're making history. He didn't bother sitting. "You're no longer a fit for where we're headed," he said, dropping a termination packet on my desk like it was a done deal. I didn't argue, didn't flinch, because while he was busy proving himself to the board, I was quietly holding the single thread holding the company together, a federal compliance filing due that Friday at exactly 11:59 p.m. The rule was simple: miss it, and the federal regulator locks you out of the portal, halting all operations until the next review cycle. That could take weeks or months depending on the queue. I had filed it every single year for 15 years. The codes, the exceptions, the hidden checkboxes that could bounce an entire submission, all in my head, never documented, never trained. That wasn't an accident. Howard Mitchell, the founder, had trusted me with it for a reason. One set of hands meant no mistakes, no leaks, no questions. Ethan didn't know the filing even existed. He thought compliance was a box-checking exercise any junior analyst could do. The moment he handed me that packet, I knew exactly how this would play out. No hacking, no theft, no illegal moves. Just time. And for the first time in years, I realized I didn't have to fight to win. I just had to stay quiet. The clock had started ticking the second he fired me, and I was the only one who knew what would happen when it hit 0. For most people, the annual federal compliance filing was just a line on some distant checklist, but for me, it was a year-round responsibility disguised as a one-day task. 15 years ago, when Howard Mitchell still ran the company with a handshake and a pen, he decided there was too much risk in letting anyone and everyone handle it. One missed field, one wrong document, and the system would reject the entire submission, locking us out until the next review cycle. He told me plainly, "Brenda, this isn't something you spread around. One person, one key, one point of contact. That's you." It became my quiet empire. Each year, I navigated a portal that looked like it hadn't been updated since dial-up, inputting codes that weren't anywhere in the public manuals, marking exceptions that only existed for our industry, and checking hidden boxes buried behind submenus that would disappear if you didn't click in the right order. No one else even knew where to start. I never wrote it down. I never trained a backup. Not because I wanted control for its own sake, but because I knew what happened when too many hands got involved. Errors, delays, and expensive fixes. Over time, I built a rhythm. I knew exactly which supporting documents to pull first, which ones could wait until the last hour, and which items had to be double verified before submission. I could tell by instinct when the system's servers were running slow, and when it was better to wait 30 seconds before clicking Submit to avoid a timeout. Even Sandra Lopez from compliance, sharp as she was, didn't have the clearance to log in. The login credentials were tied to my federal ID, the password reset process required in-person verification, and the security questions were based on personal markers only I knew. It wasn't arrogance, it was architecture, a structure designed to be airtight. And Ethan Reynolds, with all his talk about efficiency and modernization, had just ripped the only person who understood that structure right out of the equation. He thought my role was clerical. I knew it was the foundation. And foundations don't announce themselves until they're gone. I didn't storm out. I didn't argue. I didn't even hint that a deadline was days away. I simply nodded, slid the termination papers into the box he'd brought, and began packing the few things I cared about. A framed photo from the compliance team's first holiday party, my favorite fountain pen, a coffee mug from a conference in Chicago. The rest stayed behind. My keycard went neatly in the center of the desk. No dramatic drop, no slammed drawers. I wanted the departure to feel so ordinary it wouldn't occur to Ethan or anyone else to ask me for a handover. That was the point. There would be no checklist, no password sheet, no, here's how you keep us compliant conversation. The filing wasn't in any shared calendar. There were no automated reminders, no alert emails. Everything lived in my head, and I wasn't about to donate it on my way out. As I walked past the glass-walled conference room, Ethan was already holding court with his hand-picked hires, talking about streamlining processes and reducing overhead. He looked up long enough to give me that smirk people wear when they think the story's over. I kept walking, because the story wasn't over. It was just moving off stage, into the quiet where the real damage could grow unnoticed. By the time they realized something was missing, the portal would be locked, the regulators would be watching, and I'd be nowhere near the blast radius. All I had to do now was wait. Friday crept in without a whisper. By late afternoon, Sandra from compliance was pinging Ethan's office more than usual, but I knew she didn't even have the right clearance to identify the real problem. Around 8 p.m., they must have realized a filing was due because Ethan started making calls to anyone who'd ever touched a compliance form. The trouble was, the federal portal wasn't friendly to amateurs. It didn't guide you through step by step. It punished you for not knowing exactly what it wanted. One wrong selection in the initial screening and the submission path would change entirely, hiding the boxes that had to be checked to avoid rejection. By 10:45 p.m., someone had found my old workstation login, but the portal still asked for my federal ID and secure PIN. Without those, it was like trying to open a safe with a paperclip. At 11:15 p.m., Ethan apparently brought in his efficiency expert from out of state. I imagined him squinting at the ancient interface, clicking through screens he didn't understand, each failed attempt resetting the session. Every wasted minute brought them closer to the point of no return. At 11:45 p.m., the clock was practically screaming. Each rejection from the portal triggered a 60-second lockout before another attempt could be made. By 11:59 p.m., the submit button was still grayed out, the form incomplete, the codes wrong. And then it happened. The quiet, absolute finality of the digital door slamming shut. Midnight. The portal locked. The screen switched to a stark message. Submission period closed. Next review cycle, pending. No alarms, no flashing lights, just silence. The kind that feels heavier than noise. They wouldn't fully grasp it yet, but the real shutdown had already begun. At exactly 12:01 a.m., the government's automated system issued the shutdown order. It wasn't dramatic. No flashing red screens or loud sirens, just a formal notice pushed to every registered contact within the company. All operations suspended pending next compliance review cycle. But the effect was instant and merciless. Within minutes, payment processors froze outgoing transfers, incoming wire requests bounced, and every active shipment was flagged, hold, regulatory. Sales reps waking up in other time zones would find their systems locked, unable to book new orders or even pull existing client records. The overnight operations team likely scrambled to restart the submission process, but the portal wouldn't reopen for anyone, not even the CEO. That's the beauty, and the brutality, of federal systems. Once the deadline passes, Human pleading means nothing. Every passing hour had a dollar sign attached, hundreds of thousands in halted sales, late penalties stacking for delayed deliveries, and clients calling in demanding answers. The weekend would bring no relief, only more frustration as leadership realized there was no fast-track fix, no phone number to call for an exception. And somewhere in those early hours, Ethan would have had to explain to Howard Mitchell why the company was suddenly frozen in place. I could picture that conversation, the confidence draining from his face as Howard asked the one question Ethan couldn't answer. Who handled this filing before? The realization would come fast and hard. They hadn't just fired someone who knew the system, they'd fired the only person capable of navigating it. The notice from the regulator wasn't a slap on the wrist. It was a padlock on the company's front door. And while they scrambled to calculate the losses, the clock was still moving, dragging them toward the longer-term consequences that would make this midnight disaster look like the easy part. By Saturday morning, the full scope of the shutdown began to reveal itself. Clients who had million-dollar orders in progress were on the phone with their own lawyers, threatening breach of contract claims. Vendors were demanding assurances before releasing inventory. The warehouse floors sat still, forklifts idle, pallets shrink-wrapped and untouched because nothing could leave without clearance. Inside the tower in Dallas, the board convened an emergency call, every member speaking in clipped, tense bursts. Someone finally read aloud the regulator's notice, pointing out the line that spelled their real sentence. Operation suspended until next compliance review cycle, estimated duration, 90 days. That was the moment the air left the room. 90 days in our industry was not a pause, it was a death sentence. Contracts had performance clauses, clients had service guarantees, and competitors would waste no time moving in to scoop up anyone feeling neglected. Howard Mitchell, who rarely raised his voice, reportedly demanded to know how such an oversight could even happen. Ethan's answer, I imagined, was a fumbling mess of half-truths, blaming outdated systems and lack of documentation, never admitting the real cause. He'd fired the system. They threw money at the problem immediately. Outside consultants, expedited review requests, even legal threats. But the system was blind to desperation. It followed its own schedule, immune to panic and power. By the end of the weekend, 2 major clients had sent formal withdrawal notices. By Monday, 4 more followed. Each one represented not just lost revenue, but lost trust. Something no compliance review could restore. For the first time since taking over, Ethan stopped talking about efficiency and started talking about survival. And as the days turned into weeks, that survival became less certain with every phone call that wasn't returned. Every meeting that ended in, "We've decided to move on." They weren't just locked out of their system, they were locked out of their own market. And the best part? Every bit of it happened without me lifting a finger. 3 weeks into the shutdown, the company had already lost nearly half its active contracts. Vendors had shifted their loyalty to competitors who could guarantee uninterrupted operations. The board's weekly updates to Howard were growing shorter, mostly because there was less and less worth reporting. Ethan had gone from being the confident face of modernization to a man avoiding the lobby for fear of running into former clients. I didn't need inside sources to know the damage was irreversible. The regulator's review cycle wouldn't even begin for another month, and by then, the market share they once guarded so fiercely would be permanently gone. From my kitchen window, coffee steaming in my hand, I could picture the office's glass tower looming over a downtown skyline that no longer belonged to them. I'd made no calls, sent no warnings, and never so much as hinted at what was coming. All I'd done was walk away when they told me I was no longer a fit. They'd lit the fuse themselves, and I had simply let it burn. People imagine revenge as loud, dramatic, and full of confrontation. But the cleanest victories are quiet, clinical, and undeniable. By the time the company could legally reopen, there would be nothing left worth saving. I didn't need to return. I didn't need to say, I told you so. The silence did all of that for me. And as far as I was concerned, the story was over the moment they handed me that box on Monday morning. Sometimes the sharpest revenge isn't delivered with shouting or lawsuits. It's the moment you realize you no longer have to lift a finger for justice to find its target. It's watching the people who underestimated you walk straight into the consequences you saw coming from miles away. This story isn't just about a company shutdown. It's about the hidden weight of institutional knowledge and the arrogance of leaders who assume people are interchangeable. For 15 years, I had been the sole gatekeeper for a process critical to the company's survival. When they fired me, they didn't just lose an employee, they severed their own lifeline. The lesson here is twofold. For professionals, never undervalue the quiet expertise you've built. It's leverage. For leaders, understand that the people who keep the machine running aren't always the loudest or the most visible. Remove them without a plan, and you might remove the one thing holding your organization together. In life, you'll encounter situations where the best response isn't to fight immediately, but to let time and truth do the work for you. Revenge doesn't have to mean destruction. It can mean simply stepping back and letting the natural consequences unfold. The satisfaction comes not from their collapse, but from knowing you remained calm, intact, and in control. How to get started today. 1. Identify the unique skills or knowledge you hold. Protect them. 2. Document your value for yourself, even if no one else asks. 3. Learn to recognize when walking away is more powerful than staying to fight. If you've ever been underestimated or replaced, I'd love to hear your story. Drop it in the comments. Share this with someone who needs a reminder of their worth. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.